They said nothing survives a Wyoming winter except ghosts, and a battle-scarred veteran was about to find out they were wrong. What he pulled from 3 black plastic bags in the snow would unravel a secret buried so deep in the mountains it was frozen in time, a truth so powerful it would expose a crime of science, ignite a war for compassion, and change everything he thought he knew about survival, about justice, and about the wild itself. Morning never really came to this part of Wyoming. It was more like a slow bruise on the horizon where silver mist swallowed the light. The Snake River breathed fog, blurring the line between water and sky. Frost clung to the pines like salt. Out here, nature was bigger than people, and time itself had learned to hold its breath. Ethan Ward woke before the light, same as every day. Habit woke him, the kind the army leaves behind long after you turn in the uniform. He poured black coffee into a dented tin mug, the bitterness a familiar sting against the cold. Everything in his small cabin had a place. Boots by the door, tools on the wall. Order wasn't comfort. It was control. He pulled on a grey sweater, a faded cap, and stepped into the fog. The world was colourless, a single breath of cold stretching into nothing. He started his run along the river trail, what he called the Mile of Silence. In for 4, out for 6. Every breath was a command to the past. Stand down. Sometimes it almost worked. Then the memories would flicker. Rotor blades, sirens, shouts cut short. He'd push harder, faster, as if he could outrun the noise in his own head. Under his glove, the long pale scar on his left wrist ached with the cold. A line drawn between still here and almost gone. By the time he reached the edge of Cold Ridge, the town was a ghost of itself. The flag at the gas station hung stiff. The windows of the hardware store were dark. He saw the light of the Cedar Cup Cafe and pushed the door open. The bell chimed. Mrs. Mabel Ortiz, the owner, was already behind the counter. "Up before God, soldier," she said, her voice warm. He set 2 crumpled bills on the counter. Coffee, to go. She poured, her eyes soft with a pity he didn't want. "You keep running in this weather. You'll end up part of the scenery." "Guess there are worse things to be," he replied. Back outside, steam rose from the cup like a spirit trying to escape. People nodded, but they kept their distance. Everyone in Cold Ridge knew who he was, and more importantly, what not to ask. The town respected silence. The run back up the hill was harder. The fog thickened, swallowing the trail until he was running through pure white. The air grew heavy. The wind moaned through the treetops, and that's when the present finally cracked. The world tilted. He was somewhere else. A desert night lit by orange flares. The smell of burning fuel. The pounding of a chopper's blades. Voices screaming over the radio. "Cavalry Unit 9, fall back." "Ward, where the hell are your men?" He remembered the sandstorm, the lost signal. The decision that came seconds too late. When he went back for them, there was only silence, a patch of ground dark with blood. The echo of the phrase that had branded him, "No one left behind." The memory hit so hard he stumbled, his knees hitting the snow. For a long moment, he wasn't sure what world he was in. Then a sound, an owl's wing slicing the air, brought him back. "It's over," he whispered, his eyes shut tight. "It's just wind." When he got back to the cabin, the fire was out. The cold waited inside like an old friend. He knelt to light a new one, his hand steady from practice, but no matter how high the flames grew, they couldn't burn away the emptiness. He stood by the window, mug in hand, watching the grey ocean of vapor shift over the frozen river. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement near the riverbank, a dark shape sliding through the mist. He squinted. It was small, too small to be a person. It paused, collapsed, then shifted again. Another gust of wind hit the window, rattling the frame. When he looked again, the shape was gone. He told himself it was nothing. The river played tricks in weather like this. But even as he turned away, the image lingered. 3 dark forms, half buried in the snow, still as stones. By morning, that image would become a nightmare. The next morning came grey and unwilling. Ethan set out along the path that followed the river, the mist so thick it muffled the world into silence. The air felt wrong, too still, too watchful. Then the wind shifted and it carried a smell, something sharp and sour, metallic. He slowed his pace, his old instincts twitching. Somewhere in the trees, a branch cracked. Then nothing. The trail showed signs of passage, tire tracks, wide and deep, the kind only a heavy truck would leave. Mud was splattered in arcs, streaked with an oily sheen. He crouched, touched it. The smell hit him again, stronger this time. Acidic, chemical, a ghost of the decontamination fluid he'd used overseas. His stomach tightened. Something was very, very wrong. The road bent sharply around the base of a hill. A rusted sign, half buried in snow, read, "No dumping." And there, beneath an old pine, sat 3 black plastic bags. They looked like ordinary trash. He would have walked right past them. He almost did, until one of the bags moved, just a twitch. A faint shift, like something inside had tried to take a breath and failed. He stopped dead. The world shrank to the sound of his own pulse hammering in his ears. He listened. Nothing. Then he heard it. A wet, fragile, rasping sound, air trying to squeeze through waterlogged lungs. He stepped forward, the mist curling around his boots. He knelt, pulled off a glove, and touched the nearest bag. It quivered. He slid his folding knife open with a muted click. The plastic tore easily. Inside, a flash of pale gold. The stench of burnt chemicals and fear hit him like a fist. When he peeled the plastic away, he froze. A foal. Small, drenched, its fur clinging in slick, patchy strands. Its tiny body trembled with every labored breath. Its eyes, half open, were cloudy and unfocused. For a second, his mind refused to see it. This kind of cruelty didn't belong in the wild. "Easy," he whispered, his voice a raw breath. "Easy now. I've got you." He cut the rest of the bag open and slid his arms underneath the foal, lifting it. It was lighter than it looked, limp, the warmth fading fast. He pulled off his own coat and wrapped the animal tight, the wool soaking through instantly. He looked at the other 2 bags, black and slick with rain. Someone had left them here to die. He set the golden foal down gently and moved to the next bag. The knife sliced through. Inside, another foal, this one smaller, with a dark coat. It flinched at the light, its legs kicking weakly. A thin cut ran across its shoulder, raw and bleeding. "It's all right," he murmured, the words clumsy and useless, but the tone was all that mattered. He tore open the 3rd bag. This one was heavier, the stench was stronger. When the plastic fell away, a grey foal slipped out, hitting the ground with a dull, wet sound. It didn't move. His pulse spiked. He knelt, pressing his fingers against its small chest. Nothing. Faint. Barely there. "Come on," he gritted out. "Come on, kid." He started rubbing its ribcage, firm but careful. When that failed, he pressed down. Once, twice, 3 times. "Don't you do this," he muttered. "Not out here." On the 4th compression, the foal's chest shuddered, a weak cough, a thin, wheezing sound. But it was real. It was alive. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, gold, black, and grey. 3 shivering, living things. But the air still burned with chemicals. The puddles around the torn bags were streaked with a black residue that smelled like poison. He stood, scanning the ground. The truck tracks led straight into the forest, toward the old Equinox compound, abandoned for years. This was no accident. The sight pulled an old memory from him, a desert clearing, horses collapsing under shellfire, the merciless voice of his sergeant. "No one left behind, Ward." He clenched his jaw. "Not again," he said to the empty woods. The rain started then, turning from a whisper to needles of ice. He shrugged off his pack, grabbed the army jacket inside, and spread it on the ground. One by one, he moved the foals onto it. Gold, then black, then grey. He covered their heads with his scarf and gloves, pressing his palms over their necks to keep the blood moving. Combat triage, check pulse, clear airway, preserve heat. The reflexes came back without thought. The golden one, the strongest, tried to lift its head, then fell against his chest. The black one trembled but kept breathing. The grey one was limp, alive only by inches. He turned toward the road, squinting through the mist. His pickup truck was parked near the ridge, 30 meters uphill, the kind of climb that turns seconds into years. He took the golden foal first, the one he would later call Ranger. He carried it in both arms, his own coat wrapped tight around it. Every step through the wet gravel felt heavier than the last. At the truck, he laid the foal on the seat and ran back for the others. Willow, the black filly, made a soft sound when he lifted her, pressing her nose against his neck. He placed her beside Ranger, then he went back for the last one, the grey one, Ash, who barely stirred. By the time he reached the truck again, his coat was soaked and his fingers were numb. He climbed inside and shut the door. The sound of the storm dulled to a roar, leaving only the soft, rasping sound of three tiny lungs fighting for air. He pulled a thermos of warm water from behind the seat and dabbed it along Ash's mouth. The foal's throat twitched. It swallowed. Outside, the wipers smeared the world into streaks of grey. The truck had become a lifeboat. Ethan checked each pulse with 2 fingers, just like he'd done 100 times on battlefields far away. Each one was faint, but it was there. And in his head, the voice rose again. No one left behind, Ward. Not the men. Not the beasts. He stared through the windshield at the white veil closing in. Copy that, he answered under his breath. He started the engine. The headlights cut through the storm, slicing across the rusted no dumping sign. As he pulled away, the 3 empty plastic bags lifted in the wind, flapping weakly across the road like ghosts too tired to haunt. The road to Cold Ridge was half mud, half ice. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. The old pickup trembled with every gust of wind. Inside the cab, it was a strange harmony of sound, the rhythmic slap of the wipers, the whine of the heater, and the faint, uneven breaths of the 3 fragile lives behind him. Ranger, the golden foal, lay against the door, his sides heaving. Willow, the smaller black filly, licked at the muzzle of Ash, who hadn't moved. He had 2 more miles to go. The truck fishtailed as he rounded a bend. He eased off the gas, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the dim amber glow of the first streetlight at the edge of town. He turned onto Main Street, the tires grinding over salt and ice, until a faint neon sign cut through the storm. Cold Ridge Veterinary Clinic. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding sideways, stopping inches from the door. He jumped out before the engine died, his boots sinking into slush. The cold hit him like a punch. He pulled open the back door, grabbed Ranger and cradled him against his chest. The foal's body was limp, its breath hot but fading. He pounded on the clinic door. "Help! I've got injured foals. 3 of them." The lock turned. The door opened. A woman with dark hair pulled back tight stood there, a stethoscope around her neck. Dr. Marisol Vega. Her eyes were calm, but they scanned him like a battlefield medic assessing damage. She froze for only a heartbeat. "Bring them in. Now," she barked over her shoulder. "Tessa, warm blankets. Nate, IV fluids, quick." Ethan stepped inside. The clinic was bright and sterile, all steel tables and white walls. It reminded him too much of military med tents, where the light was always too harsh and time was never enough. Marisol cleared a table with one sweep of her arm. "Set him down." Ethan obeyed, pulling his coat away from Ranger's shivering body. Marisol's hands moved fast. Thermometer, stethoscope, saline rinse. "Heart rate's high but steady," she muttered. "We can work with that." "2 more," Ethan said, his voice a rough growl. She nodded once. "Go." He ran back through the storm twice, bringing in Willow and then Ash. When he placed Ash on the 3rd table, the foal didn't move. Marisol's jaw tightened. "Nate, I need adrenaline. Ready." The intern fumbled with a syringe. She snatched it from him. "Ethan, hold him, firm but gentle." He placed one hand under the small neck, the other along the chest. He could feel no movement at all. "Stay with me, little one," he whispered. "You're not done yet." The room pulsed with urgency. Tessa, the young assistant, moved like lightning. Nate, nervous but focused, connected IV lines. Marisol's voice was a steady command. "Flush the coats with warm saline. Keep their heads elevated." Steam rose from the foal's coats as the saline hit the chemical burns. The bitter, acrid smell of organophosphate filled the air. Ethan coughed, his throat burning. "Temperature on the grey ones dropping." Tessa called out. 28 Celsius. "Keep that blanket hot," Marisol cursed softly. Ethan leaned closer to Ash, listening for a heartbeat that barely existed. The monitor above the table flickered, then went flat. Tessa gasped. No pulse. Adrenaline, Marisol snapped. Point 3, now. She plunged the syringe into the foal's flank. Silence. The storm hammered the windows. Ethan held the tiny head steady, whispering, "Come on, breathe, you're not done yet." Seconds stretched into an eternity, then a single beep. Another. The line on the monitor jumped weakly, then steadied. Ash jerked, coughed once, a faint, broken sound, but he was alive. Ethan exhaled hard, his shoulders slumping. Marisol allowed herself a single nod. "Good job, whoever you are." He met her gaze. Just someone who couldn't walk away. When the immediate danger had passed, the clinic settled into a strange quiet. The only sounds were the hum of machines and the hiss of the heater. Marisol peeled off her gloves and leaned over a table. The chemical residue on the foal's coats had left faint burns, patches where the fur had fallen away. She frowned. "This isn't farm waste." Ethan looked up. "What is it then?" She sniffed again, cautious but certain. "It's an industrial organophosphate blend, the kind they use in labs for testing nerve resistance." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You sure?" Her jaw tightened. "I worked for 2 years at Equinox Biotech. I could never forget this smell." Their eyes met. In that second, they both understood. This wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. Marisol leaned closer and whispered, "If they came from where I think they came from, someone is willing to kill to erase them." Ethan stared at the floor, at his reflection broken in the puddles of meltwater around his boots. He'd seen this kind of cold logic before, in different uniforms, on different continents. The belief that some lives are just material. He spoke quietly, without looking up. "Then we don't let them die again." By midnight, the storm had swallowed the town. Inside the clinic, the 3 foals slept under layers of blankets, their breath steady. Ethan sat near the table, sleeves rolled up, watching them. Marisol walked in with 2 cups of coffee. The steam curled between them. "They'll need round-the-clock care tonight," she said. He nodded. "I'll stay." "You don't even know their names," she said, a faint smile on her lips. He looked at the sleeping forms, his eyes softening. He placed a hand lightly on each in turn. "This one's Ranger," he said, touching the golden coat. "This one, Willow," he added, resting his palm on the black filly. "And him, Ash." "Why those names?" Marisol asked. His smile was faint but real. "Because they sound like they survived something." Morning came late, burying Cold Ridge in a sheet of untouched snow. Inside the clinic, the air smelled of iodine and burned coffee. Ethan sat slumped in a chair, not having slept. Beside the tables, the 3 foals were breathing. Marisol moved between them, checking their vitals. "They made it through the night," she said softly. "Barely." "Sometimes," he said, rubbing his eyes, "that's all it takes." It was nearly noon before Marisol began washing away the last of the chemical residue from Ash, the smallest one. As she worked, she noticed something odd along the curve of his neck. A faint indentation under the damp fur. She turned the lamp closer. The light caught on something too precise to be natural. A narrow line of dots shimmered beneath the skin, uniform and metallic. It wasn't a wound. It was a marking. She reached for a magnifier, adjusted the lens, and squinted. Under the lens, the pattern sharpened into something unmistakable. EQ47B. The letters were tiny, perfect, burned into the flesh by a laser. She froze. The sound of her own breathing filled the room. "Oh my God," she whispered. Ethan looked up instantly. "What is it?" Marisol straightened, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and old anger. "It's a tag, a research batch code." She swallowed hard. "Equinox Biotech." Ethan frowned. "The old genetics company up north. The one that shut down." "Shut down publicly," she corrected, her jaw tight. "They called it an ethics violation. But I worked there, Ethan. I ran cellular assays for a project called Endurance Lineage. We were supposed to be creating horses for extreme climates." She glanced down at the code again, the letters glinting like an old wound. "EQ stands for Equinox. 47 is the project batch. And B means it was a failure, a disposable." The room felt colder than the snow outside. Ethan said nothing, but something behind his eyes shifted. The same awareness that once told him when a convoy was heading into an ambush. War, he realized, had never really ended. It had only changed its disguise. They sat across from each other at a steel table. They called it the Cold Breed Program, Marisol said, her voice low. The goal was to create a horse that could survive sub-zero temperatures, resist fatigue, carry heavier loads. Officially, it was a defense contract. Off the record, it was genetic warfare. "And you quit," Ethan stated. "When I found out what they were really using," she said, "modified nerve agents to stimulate endurance. They told us it was safe in small doses. It wasn't. The animals that didn't adapt, they called it expected loss." Her hands trembled. "I walked out. I told myself that would be enough." "It wasn't," Ethan finished for her. She shook her head. "No, and this foal proves they never stopped." He rose and walked to the window. Outside, the three foals lay quietly beneath heat lamps, fragile but alive. "I've seen what happens," he said, "when men play God, with soldiers or with animals. They tell themselves it's for survival, but all it ever builds is ghosts." Marisol studied him. The exhaustion etched into his face was from more than just one sleepless night. "If I report this," she said quietly, "they'll come for them before we even know what we've found." Ethan turned to face her, his voice calm but certain. "Then we stay quiet. For now." That afternoon, as the temperature dropped, Ethan paced by the door. "This place is too exposed," he said. "If they're looking, this will be the first place they check." "And you have somewhere safer?" she challenged. "My cabin, 5 miles out toward the ridge, deep woods, no neighbors." It was a risk. Moving them again could kill them, but leaving them here was worse. By dusk, they had the foals loaded into the back of Ethan's truck, wrapped in insulation and wool. The heater ran full blast as snow began to fall again, heavy and thick, as if the mountain itself was trying to erase their tracks. As they drove out of town, its few lights shrinking into the mist, Marisol stared out the window. "I quit because I couldn't sleep," she said softly, knowing what we'd done. He gripped the wheel a little tighter. "Then maybe saving them now makes it count." It was nearly night when the truck crested the last hill. Ethan's cabin appeared through the swirling snow, a shadow of timber and stone, its windows glowing faintly orange. He parked, killed the engine, and listened. The only sound was the hiss of falling snow. Together they carried the foals inside, laying them near the hearth. The heat from the stove melted the frost from their fur. Ethan stacked logs until the flames rose high. The room filled with the smell of pine sap and smoke. Outside, the wind screamed across the ridge. "They'll be safe here," he said. Marisol looked around at the worn maps, the narrow cot, the rifles hanging above the door. It wasn't much, but it was a fortress. "They'll come for them," she said, her voice certain. Ethan stood at the window, watching the snow build against the glass. The firelight painted his face in shifting shades of gold and shadow. "Then they'll have to find us first." Morning returned soft and white. What had once been a hermit's retreat was now a makeshift sanctuary. A small pen built from broken pallets stood near the hearth, lined with old blankets. The air was warm, smelling of pine smoke and disinfectant. Ethan moved quietly, checking each foal. Ranger, the golden one, stood for the first time, his legs trembling but determined. Willow, the black filly, was still curled into herself, her ears flat. And Ash, small and grey, lay half awake, his breath steady. Ethan was a soldier, learning peace. He carved order out of the chaos. EO 600, stoke the fire. EO 700, mix warm milk. 1200, massage Ranger's legs. 1800, clean wounds. Marisol visited every afternoon, bringing supplies and a quiet smile. He spoke more to the animals than to her. As he cleaned a cut on Willow's side, he murmured, "You're tougher than you look, girl." This time she didn't flinch. She turned her head toward him, her eyes wide and wet, and watched him. It was the first moment of trust. At night, he slept on the floor beside their pen, wrapped in an old army blanket. Sometimes, when the fire burned low, he could feel their breathing against the floorboards, 3 slow heartbeats syncing with his own. For the first time in years, he slept without nightmares. The peace, of course, didn't last. It broke on a Thursday evening. The sky rumbled and a storm tore through the trees, the rain slashing against the roof. Inside, the fire wavered, twisting shadows across the walls. Willow startled first. Her ears shot up, her eyes wide with panic. The next thunderclap broke like artillery fire. She bolted upright, kicking against the pen, her hooves striking wood like gunshots. Ethan's heart seized. For a second, the thunder wasn't thunder. It was mortar fire. The cabin vanished. He was back in the sand, the smoke, the screams. His muscles tensed. The instinct was to run, to fight. But then he heard her frantic snort, the desperate rhythm of something alive and terrified. He forced his breath steady. He pushed through the tremor in his hands and stepped toward her slowly. Easy, his voice came low. It's just thunder, girl. You're safe. She backed into the corner, her eyes rolling white. He didn't reach for her. He simply sat down on the cold wooden floor a few feet away, between her and the door, a silent guardian. The storm raged. It's just thunder, he said again. No guns, no fire, no fear, just rain. Another flash of lightning lit the room. Willow flinched, but this time she didn't bolt. His presence was an anchor. Minutes passed. The thunder moved farther away. Willow's breathing slowed. She took a tentative step forward, then another, until her muzzle brushed against his shoulder. He didn't move. He just let her stay there. Two survivors, both scarred, finding a truce in the quiet after the storm cleared by dawn, the mountains shone. Inside the cabin, warmth pulsed like a heartbeat. Ranger was walking now, stiff-legged but proud. Willow followed him, her ears flicking with curiosity instead of fear. And Ash, tiny, stubborn Ash, had finally lifted his head that morning, letting out a weak, squeaky whinny that made Marisol laugh. He's fighting back, she said, kneeling beside him. Ethan chuckled softly. He just needed someone to fight for him. She looked up at him, and for the first time there was no distance between them, just a quiet understanding. Later, as he scribbled in his notebook, Marisol leaned over his shoulder and read aloud. Day 10. Ranger stands firm. Willow trusts touch. Ash blinked at the light, progress measured in heartbeats. She smiled. You write like a soldier and a poet. He shrugged. Maybe the war left both behind. For the first time, real laughter filled the small cabin. It didn't sound like survival anymore. It sounded like living. But out on the ridge, the real storm was still gathering. And it was coming for them. The wind came early one morning in March, rolling down the ridge in long, uneven breaths. The sky was thick and grey, promising one last storm. Ethan stepped outside to check the perimeter. The world felt too quiet. That's when he saw them. Tracks, not from deer or snowshoe hares. These were deep, heavy tire impressions cut into the frozen ground near the tree line. He crouched. The pattern was distinctive. Off-road, military grade. He hadn't seen that tread in years, not since Kandahar. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. The cabin door creaked. Marisol stepped out, wrapped in his old field jacket. Something wrong? He kept his eyes on the tracks. Maybe someone might be looking for what we found. He grabbed his cap and jacket. The wind bit at his face as he headed for his truck. Be careful, Ethan. Her voice carried through the cold. He didn't answer. He just drove into the whitening storm. The county office sat at the far end of Main Street. Sheriff Lucas Hale looked up from his desk as Ethan entered. Haven't seen you in years, Ward. What brings you out of the snow? Ethan placed his phone on the desk, showing a photo of the tire track. Anyone in town drive this pattern? Hale squinted. That's not local equipment. Where'd you find it? 5 miles up Ridge Trail. The sheriff frowned. You still living out there alone? Ethan hesitated. Not exactly. Hale studied him for a beat. You hear things, soldier. The woods play tricks when you're alone too long. Ethan just pocketed his phone. By the time you send a patrol, he said quietly, it'll be too late. When he left, the wind slammed the door behind him. He didn't drive home. He veered north toward an old access road that vanished into the forest. He crawled through the snow until a gate appeared. Equinox Biotech. Research Division, One side of the fence sagged open. He killed the engine and waded through the drifts. The silence was immense. Inside the compound, time had stopped. Rusted steel walls, broken crates, and there, stacked in neat rows, were plastic drums with faded warning symbols. Organophosphate. His breath misted as he scraped frost off a label. He'd seen that word on chemical canisters overseas. He moved deeper. Chains hung from ceiling beams. A steel frame, the kind used to restrain large animals, jutted from a wall. Strands of dark hair clung to one bolt. On the floor, a torn piece of black plastic, and blood dried to a reddish brown. He took photos, his movements deliberate. A toppled filing cabinet caught his eye. He pried it open. Soggy papers spilled out. One heading was still visible: Batch EQ47B series. Viability test. Son of a bitch, he muttered. As he crouched to pick up a fragment, a sharp crack sounded behind him, the unmistakable snap of a branch under weight. He froze. The air shifted, carrying the faint metallic scent of gun oil. In a shard of a broken mirror, he saw a shadow gliding between the pillars. He straightened slowly, every nerve awake. "You shouldn't be here, cowboy." The voice came from the shadows, low and controlled. A tall man stepped into the light, dressed in black tactical gear, a pistol visible under his coat. His eyes were hard and measured. Ethan recognized the type instantly. Mercenary. "Neither should you," Ethan said evenly. The man smiled thinly. "You found something that doesn't belong to you." "Three somethings," Ethan replied, still breathing. The smile vanished. The man, Kurt Voss, took a step closer. "Then you already know too much." Outside, the faint cry of a horse cut through the stillness. It was Ranger. The sound made Voss glance toward the doorway for just a fraction of a second. It was all Ethan needed. He threw the glass shard he'd palmed toward a stack of canisters. It hit metal with a ringing clang. Voss spun instinctively. Ethan lunged. He slammed into the bigger man's arm, knocking the pistol loose. The weapon skidded across the concrete floor. The fight was quick, brutal, two trained bodies colliding in silence. Ethan ducked a swing and drove his shoulder into Voss's chest. Voss drew a knife. Ethan grabbed the man's forearm and twisted hard. The blade slipped free, but not before it sliced along Ethan's sleeve. Blood welled, but he barely felt it. "Not bad," Voss grunted. Ethan grabbed the nearest object, a rusted clipboard, and hurled it into a light fixture. The bulb burst, plunging the room into near darkness. He ran. He burst through a broken window, the glass tearing at his jacket. He hit the ground, rolled, and scrambled to his truck. He gunned the engine. In the rearview mirror, he saw Voss standing in the doorway, framed by the swirling snow. He wasn't giving chase, he was just watching. A predator marking its prey. By the time Ethan reached the ridge, the world was chaos. Snow slashed sideways. The engine groaned. Every gust of wind felt like a punch. This wasn't panic. It was the old familiar rhythm of combat. He wasn't running from the war anymore. It had found him. When the cabin's outline finally emerged through the storm, he saw Marisol in the open doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan, what happened?" she shouted over the wind. He stumbled inside and dropped his phone on the table. The screen lit up with the photos, chemical drums, bloodstains, the EQ47 code. "We're not alone anymore," he said, his voice low. She covered her mouth, staring at the evidence. He moved to the window, scanning the dark edge of the woods. The snow parted just enough for him to see it. A single dark shape among the trees. Motionless. Watching. "He knows where we are," Ethan murmured. Marisol turned to him, whispering, "Who is he?" Ethan didn't answer. He just reached for the rifle hanging above the fireplace and checked the chamber. Outside, the wind screamed. The firelight flickered across their faces. Two silhouettes braced against the coming storm. The silent war had begun. 3 days later, the ridge went quiet. Too quiet. Ethan stood outside at dawn, listening. The silence felt wrong. The kind of hush that comes before an attack. His old instincts, buried for years, were screaming. He checked the barn. The latch was closed, but a small window stood open a crack. He knew he'd locked it. Inside, Ranger pawed the ground, restless. Willow refused her feed. Ash lay curled and still. He closed the window, secured it with a second bolt, then walked the perimeter, scattering ashes from the fireplace across the snow. An old trick. If anyone walked through, the prince would tell. Night fell with a deceptive calm. The forest looked harmless, wrapped in silver moonlight. But between the trees, three shapes moved. Men in dark coats, walking single file. They carried red-lensed flashlights and cans of fuel. "He's alone," one whispered. "Get it done fast." Inside the cabin, Ethan sat by the window. Ranger gave a low, uneasy whinny. Ethan killed the lights. Through a sliver in the curtain, he caught the faint pulse of red light cutting across the snow. He reached for his pistol. Outside, the men spread out. One crouched beside the barn wall, uncapping a gas can. The sharp chemical smell hit Ethan even through the glass. His jaw clenched. He heard the faint click of a lighter. Then, in a single breath, the night exploded. A serpent of flame ran up the wooden wall, bright and hungry. The barn became a silhouette of fire. Ranger screamed, a deep, furious sound that shook the valley. Ethan was already moving. He shoved the door open and sprinted toward the blaze. Behind him, three shadows melted back into the trees. The barn was an inferno. Flames crawled along the beams, snapping like breaking bones. Smoke rolled thick and black. Ethan threw his coat over his head and ran through the door. "Easy, Ranger, I'm here." The golden stallion reared back, his eyes wild, but he recognized Ethan's voice. Willow panicked beside him, thrashing. Ash lay near the straw, motionless. The heat clawed at Ethan's skin. He soaked a blanket from the water trough and wrapped it around his face. He cut Ranger's rope. The horse bolted, but only a few feet, giving Ethan space to work. He pulled at Willow's latch, coughing so hard he tasted blood. Outside, tires screeched, headlights cut through the smoke. "Ethan!" It was Marisol. Her jeep skidded to a stop. She jumped out, hauling a bucket of water in each hand, her eyes wide with horror. "The Foals are trapped," he yelled. Together they fought the fire, throwing water on the doorframe, trying to create an escape path. A support beam cracked overhead. It was going to collapse right on top of them. But Ranger lunged forward, shoving his shoulder against the burning wood with a force that sent sparks flying. The beam shifted, crashing aside, leaving a narrow opening. His mane caught flame at the edges. "Go! Go, boy!" Ethan shouted. Ranger bolted through. Willow followed, but at the threshold she stopped and turned back. Ash was still inside, his small body twitching. Before Ethan could move, Willow spun back into the inferno. She bit down hard on Ash's mane and dragged him with a fierce, almost human determination. Ethan splashed the last of the water over them as they stumbled out into the snow. They collapsed, steam rising off their bodies like breath from the earth itself. Marisol dropped to her knees beside them. Ranger, minor burns. Willow, shock. Ash, alive. Ethan leaned back in the snow, his lungs burning. "Alive," he rasped. "That's enough." Marisol turned to him, soot streaking her face. "You did it." He shook his head. "We did." They looked up at the barn, now completely swallowed by flame. The wind tore through the fire, scattering embers into the snow. It looked like the sky was weeping sparks, and through it all, Ranger stood guard, scorched but unbroken, the reflection of the fire burning in his eyes. By dawn, only smoke remained. The barn was a black skeleton. Ethan and Marisol sat on the steps, wrapped in blankets. The foals huddled under a tarp. The distant wail of sirens echoed up the valley. Sheriff Lucas Hale stepped out of his patrol car. He took one look at the scene and muttered, "Christ, Ward, what the hell happened here?" Ethan just handed him his phone. The sheriff swiped through the photos. Tire prints, chemical drums, the Equinox label, and now this. "Same pattern," Ethan said quietly. "Same bastards." Hale walked around the ruins, his flashlight catching the sheen of spilled fuel. The tread marks led straight back toward the forest. He blew out a long breath. "Maybe you were right all along." Marisol joined them. "This wasn't random. They wanted to erase evidence." "Then they just made it official," Hale said grimly. "This isn't vandalism, it's arson and attempted murder." He turned to his deputy. "Photograph everything, collect samples, get soil for accelerant tests." As the firefighters doused the last embers, Ethan stood apart, staring at the ruins. The sheriff walked over, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'll get them, son, I promise." Ethan's eyes never left the smoke. "Make sure you do it fast." When the sun finally broke through the clouds, the air still smelled of smoke, but the storm was gone. Ranger limped toward Ethan, pressing his muzzle against his hand. Willow stood beside Marisol. Ash lay in a thick blanket, his chest rising slow but strong. "They're not killing Hope this time," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. Marisol looked at him, and for the first time she saw not a soldier haunted by ghosts, but a man who had chosen to fight for life. The fire had burned his home to its bones, but not the questions that lived inside it. Sheriff Hale kept his promise. Samples of ash, melted plastic, and the 2 dented chemical drums were delivered under seal to Marisol's clinic. With the ranch gone, they turned the clinic's basement into a lab. Marisol lowered a pipette into a cloudy vial. The spectrometer hummed. A string of chemical symbols appeared on the screen. "It's not pesticide," she whispered, her hand trembling. "It's the cold breed compound, a neuromuscular enhancer." Ethan's reflection in the glass looked carved from stone. "You're saying they were bred for war?" She nodded slowly. "Designed to survive frost, starvation, exhaustion, and pain." That night, after the last tests were logged, Marisol finally told him everything. "5 years ago, I worked in their genetics division. I helped design the sequences that made these foals immune to hypothermia. I thought we were developing rescue animals." Her voice faltered. "Then I saw what they were really doing, the experiments without anesthesia. Dr. Hale Danner walking past cages saying, 'Sacrifice makes stronger breeds.' When I saw that mark on Ash, it was like seeing my own sin carved into his skin." "You didn't make them monsters," Ethan said, his voice quiet. "You gave them a chance to survive. The monsters were the ones who forgot mercy." "What do I do now?" she whispered. "Tell the truth." He met her eyes. "The kind that burns everything down." 2 days later, the truth took the form of a woman with a camera. Clara Monroe, an investigative reporter. They met at the Cedar Cup Cafe. Marisol slid a folder across the table, photos of the burned barrels, the laser-etched code, the chemical readout. Clara's expression tightened. "If this is real, it's a federal violation of the Genetic Manipulation Act." "We don't need headlines," Ethan said. "We need to stop them." Clara didn't flinch. "You can't stop what you can't expose. You want justice. Let the world see what they did." The alliance was forged over cold coffee and a folded map of the valley. Marisol would analyze the foal's DNA, verifying the artificial splicing. Ethan would gather physical evidence and the sheriff's testimony. Clara would compile the story, encrypt the data, and send it through a lawyer in Denver connected to the Federal Bioethics Committee. By dawn, they were back at the ruins of the cabin. Marisol set up a portable analyzer. She inserted a vial of blood from Ranger. The machine beeped, a line of code projected onto the screen. "Sequence anomaly, 32% synthetic splice." "Proof," she exhaled. Clara photographed the readout, then turned the lens on Marisol. "Say it in your own words." Marisol looked straight into the camera. "These animals were genetically engineered for endurance and pain resistance by Equinox Biotech. We have chemical and genetic proof." The truth never explodes all at once. Sometimes it rises quietly, like the first crack of sunlight through storm clouds. The Denver Tribune hit the stands with a front-page headline that froze the country. "The Foals of Cold Ridge: How Science Tried to Rewrite Nature." Beneath it was Clara's haunting photograph of Ranger, Willow, and Ash. The story spread like wildfire. The hashtag #JossColdRidgeFoals trended worldwide, captioned again and again with one phrase: "Mercy still breathes." In the rebuilt cabin, Ethan read the article on his laptop. "Well, Doc," he said, half smiling, "looks like the storm just went public." The counterattack began within hours. Equinox Biotech released a statement calling the claims fabricated by a disgruntled former employee. On national television, CEO Dr. Hale Danner appeared, his voice smooth as glass. "Our company adheres strictly to federal ethics guidelines." But it was too late. People in Cold Ridge began sharing their own photos of the abandoned compound. Then Sheriff Hale went on local television, his badge dull under the studio lights. "We found enough to believe something real bad happened out there," he said, "and we're not letting it slide." That statement hit harder than any headline. The state attorney's office demanded a full investigation. Federal agents started drawing up warrants. That night, Marisol's phone buzzed with a hidden number. One message: "You've started something you can't stop." Ethan read it over her shoulder. His face didn't change. "Then we finish it," he said. 2 mornings later, a convoy of unmarked trucks wound through the frozen highway toward Ashford Mountain. In the lead vehicle rode Ethan, Marisol, and Sheriff Hale. Behind them, Clara's press van streamed to Denver in real time. And Ranger was there too. The Mustang had become their compass, leading them into the heart of what man had tried to hide. They reached the rusted gates of the Cold Breed facility. "Federal warrant, open up," Hale shouted through a loudspeaker. Silence. A SWAT unit rammed the door. It swung inward, exhaling a breath of chemicals and frost. The facility was half lit, half dead. Rows of steel cages, broken syringes, and in one corridor they found what shouldn't have existed. Stalls lined with skeletal forms, horses, wolves, even hybrid deer, all breathing faintly, their eyes reflecting terror. A deputy shouted from the far end, "Sheriff, there's a lower level." They followed his light to a sealed steel door. Ranger suddenly reared, his hooves striking a cracked section of wall nearby. The sound echoed, hollow. "There's a chamber behind this," Ethan said. "Get the cutters." Sparks flew. When the panel gave way, a blast of icy air rolled out. They descended a narrow stairwell into the belly of the mountain, and there, surrounded by blinking monitors, stood Kurt Voss. He was clutching a portable hard drive. "Drop it," Ethan ordered. Voss hesitated, then let it fall. Deeper in the facility, an alarm sounded. A door slammed, the sound of boots retreating down a tunnel. "That's Dana," Marisol's voice shook. "He's running." Red lights flared. A recorded voice began a countdown. "Containment breach detected. Evacuate immediately." White vapor hissed from vents. The scene became a blur of smoke and flashing lights. Through it all, Ethan stayed with Ranger, guiding him through the maze. When they finally emerged back into the daylight, the mountain exhaled a cloud of steam behind them. Kurt Voss was dragged out in cuffs. As federal agents loaded him into a truck, he leaned toward Ethan. "You think you stopped it? You just slowed it down." "Then I'll keep slowing it," Ethan met his eyes, "until it stops." The press gathered as the first of the rescued animals were led out, blinking in the light. Then, through the haze of smoke and snow, came Ranger, head high. Behind him walked Willow, fragile but steady. Then Ash, still weak but refusing to fall. Marisol's eyes flooded with tears. "They were born in darkness," she whispered to Clara's rolling camera. "Now they see the sun." Her words went out live across the nation. Justice had awakened, and it had teeth. The courthouse in Cheyenne rose from the snow like a monument carved from silence. Inside, the marble halls echoed with whispers. "That's him," someone said as Ethan Ward walked through the corridor. "The Cold Ridge veteran." The prosecutor, Donna Lowe, stood first. "This case," she began, "is not about profit. It is about the line between progress and cruelty." Behind her, a massive screen showed images of the burned compound, the genetic code, and finally, the video of the 3 foals stepping into daylight. The room fell silent. Dr. Hale Danner sat at the defendant's table, his expression calm, clinical, empty. Witness after witness took the stand. Sheriff Hale, Clara Monroe, an FBI geneticist who confirmed the synthetic DNA splices. When Marisol's name was called, she walked with the steadiness of someone with nothing left to hide. "Dr. Vega," the prosecutor asked, "please tell the court your involvement." Her voice trembled at first. "I was a geneticist. The project was introduced as humanitarian research." She paused. "But soon the protocols changed. We were told to test muscle endurance through chemical amplification. They began experimenting without anesthesia. When subjects failed, they were disposed of." The defense attorney rose. "So you admit you broke your contract?" "No," Marisol said quietly, her eyes fierce. "I honored a higher one." "And what contract is that?" "The one that says life deserves mercy." Then the judge allowed a statement from Ethan Ward. He rose slowly. He carried no notes. "I'm not a scientist," he began, his voice low and steady. "I'm a man who found 3 lives in the snow. They were born to endure," he said, his gaze fixed on Dana. "But they shouldn't have to suffer to prove it. We build cages and call them progress. We build excuses and call them survival. But when I looked into their eyes that night, I didn't see science. I saw mercy. And maybe that's what we're really on trial for today. The part of us that remembers what mercy looks like." He drew a slow breath. "If mercy is weakness, then I hope we never get strong again." The room stayed silent long after he sat down. The verdict came that afternoon. Judge Holloway took the bench. "This court finds the defendants, Dr. Hale Dana and Senator William Knox, guilty on all counts." She paused. "Dr. Dana, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. This court holds that no pursuit of power justifies cruelty." The gavel fell. One sharp strike. It was over. Outside, the crowd from Cold Ridge stood waiting. When Ethan emerged, the noise fell to a hush. Then the first clap came from Sheriff Hale. Others joined until the sound swelled, raw and human. Ethan only looked to the far end of the courtyard, where Ranger stood behind a fence. The horse lifted his head, his breath silver in the cold air. Marisol came up beside him. "It's over," she whispered. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "It's just lighter now." After the trial, Ethan packed what little he owned and moved to Callahan Ranch, a small spread tucked against the lower ridge, run by an old friend. The mountains of Elk Valley glowed pale gold in the early light. After the fire and the storm, the land had learned to breathe again. The barn had new tenants. Ranger, his coat a deep burnished gold. Willow, gentle and steady now. And Ash, once the weakest, now ran alongside them, clumsy but determined. Marisol and Clara visited often, helping mend fences. Word spread. The man who'd saved the foals was now building a sanctuary. Donations began to appear. The town, once defined by its silence, was now defined by its hope. One crisp morning, Ethan hauled a plank of pine to the ranch gate. He carved the letters by hand. "Harbor of Hope, where the wild is free." Clara lifted her camera. The shutter clicked. That photo would later become the cover of her book. A year after the trial, the people of Cold Ridge gathered for a celebration. Banners fluttered. Clara stepped up to a small wooden stage. "This isn't just a sanctuary," she told the crowd. "It's proof that compassion rebuilds what cruelty breaks." When the new sign was unveiled, Cold Ridge Sanctuary, the crowd cheered. Then volunteers opened the gates. A dozen rehabilitated horses galloped free into the valley, their manes rippling like banners of wind. One dawn, weeks later, Ethan rode toward the high country. Marisol followed in the truck, the trailer behind carrying Ranger, Willow, and Ash, now grown strong. They reached the same clearing where long ago he'd found 3 black plastic bags. He unlatched the trailer gate. Ranger stepped out first, then Willow, then Ash. They were home. "They were never ours to keep," he said. He raised a hand. The horses moved, first to a trot, then a gallop, climbing the slope until they were silhouettes against the rising sun. Then they vanished into the wilderness. The valley echoed with their calls, clear, bright, eternal. Ethan stood listening. He turned back toward the ranch, sunlight spilling down the mountain like liquid gold. The story began in silence and snow. It ended in warmth and light. Thank you for staying with us through this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. And be sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to us.